Prioritize the family, and that starts with supper at home. Talking with parents, I find that this parent's going to drive her daughter to computer coding class and then travel team soccer, and they're going to eat a sandwich on the way from computer coding class to travel team soccer. We have good studies. Colleagues interviewed more than 10,000 adolescents coast to coast and asked them in the last 7 days, how many evening meals have you had at home with at least one parent, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and found a huge benefit of family meals in terms of decreasing anxiety and depression and improving outlook. The benefits of a family meal at home are tremendous. Prioritize the family.
Our world is changing fast right before our eyes. As parents, we're left wondering why our sons seem unmotivated and our daughters anxious. Screens, culture, and pressures from all around seem to be shaping our children's hearts faster than we can. In this episode of Different by Design, Dr. Leonard Sax, physician, psychologist, and author of Boys Adrift and Girls on Edge, joins us to unpack what's really happening with kids today and what a true education really looks like to shape students in the things that truly matter. Welcome to Different by Design. Thank you for joining us today on Different by Design. I'm your host, Matt Dixon, along with Trinity's founder and head of school, Liz Caddo. And today, we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from our regularly scheduled programming, and we're welcoming an outsider. So Dr. Sax, thank you for joining us on our podcast today. But I know for those who are listening, it's one you're going to really enjoy. And he's going to be talking about how, in a variety of ways, things that we see about really kids and students in today's culture, talking about parenting and other relevant topics from his perspective as an MD and PhD, with both research-based and practical insights for our students and our families today. And so with all that to say, Dr. Sax, we just want to thank you for joining us on Different by Design.
Thanks for inviting me.
Before we begin, we'd just love for you to share with our audience some of your background, where you're from, and to know a little bit more about you. This is something I've been curious about. What was maybe some of the impetus behind some of the research you've done? What led you down that path? What interested you in those topics? So we'd love to hear some of that from you.
So I attended public schools in Ohio, K through 12. I earned my undergraduate degree in biology at MIT. I earned my doctorate in psychology as well as my MD at the University of Pennsylvania. Did a residency in family medicine in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Practiced family medicine in Montgomery County, Maryland for 18 years. I'm now practicing in Chester County, Pennsylvania. It's not common to find a family physician who's often also a PhD psychologist. I didn't set out to have a specialty practice, but back in the early 90s, most pediatricians would not prescribe for ADHD. Back in the 1990s, if a pediatrician was concerned about ADHD, they would send the child out to be evaluated. But parents found that my office was one-stop shopping because I could do the evaluation and prescribe the medication. So fairly quickly, by the mid-90s, my office was pretty much overrun with boys, mostly boys, with parents coming in with a slip from the school saying, we're concerned about Justin or Damien or Carlos. He's not paying attention. And I found that in many cases, the problem was not in the boy, but in the school. The school didn't understand that this 8-year-old boy cannot sit for 90 minutes to learn about diphthongs. And you move him to a different school that is more boy-friendly, and suddenly he doesn't have the problem anymore. So I began visiting more schools and began writing about this. And that's kind of how I got here.
Well, that's great. And I know we can dive into that a little bit more, but what I appreciate even of your books and your research, and when I've been able to hear you speak, it seems like a very simple, and yet in our culture today, a very profound statement that boys and girls are different. They are. And I know you speak a lot about that and talk a lot about that from not just what we observe, but really in research. And so I love hearing kind of where some of that started. When we're talking about the context of education as a whole, and obviously you've been educated yourself and you've visited many schools, what would you say from your perspective a successful education looks like? So obviously we're talking about more than just academics. I always think of Chesterton, where Chesterton says education is not a subject and it doesn't deal in subjects. Rather, education is a transfer of a way of life. And so there's obviously a lot more to education than just an academic pursuit, but yet it is certainly nothing less than an academic pursuit too. There's more. What would you say a successful education looks like?
Well, again, when I try to answer questions like that, I'm always trying to ground my answer in evidence. And we have longitudinal cohort studies in which researchers have followed kids from childhood through adolescence into adulthood, 30, 40, 50 years of age. Researchers have evaluated these kids at, for example, 12 years of age and looked at their grades and test scores. Have also done comprehensive psychological assessment at 12 years of age to determine for each one of these kids their openness to new ideas, their emotional stability, and their conscientiousness, their honesty, and their self-control. And then follow them, track them down 20 years later. And what characteristic of a child at 12 years of age predicts health, wealth, and happiness at 32 years of age? It's not your grades or test scores. It's not your emotional stability. It's not your popularity. It's not your openness to new ideas. It is conscientiousness, meaning honesty and self-control. So it follows from that our first priority, not only as teachers but as parents, should be to teach virtue, by which I mean honesty and self-control. That's not in place of the content areas, but it's fundamental to the content areas. Because if a child is not honest and not self-controlled, they're not going to learn the content areas. They're going to cheat. And there has been an explosion in cheating in the United States over the last 20 years, which I document in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. Indeed, a lot of American kids now are using ChatGPT to cheat and think nothing of it because all the kids are doing it, because they have not been instructed in the virtue of conscientiousness. I just wrote an article for the Institute for Family Studies. The very latest data from USC, actually, looking nationwide, finds a dramatic decline in conscientiousness and honesty and self-control among young Americans over the past 10 years. And along with that, a dramatic decline in grit. So all the qualities of character that we want to instill in young people, honesty, self-control, grit, perseverance, resilience, are dropping. And I don't think this is an accident. You know, you go back to the 1950s, the National Educational Association said that our first priority as teachers is to teach character. Well, for the last 30 years, the National Education Association has been saying our first priority is academic rigor, to teach the content areas. And they don't want to talk about teaching values because that's very dangerous character. Well, you know, you reap what you sow. If you're not going to teach character, then you will end up with kids who don't have good moral character. You have to have the courage to teach honesty and self-control, and to do that in a moral framework. I attended public schools K through 12, but I really fear for the public schools because they have lost their moral framework for the most part. It's interesting because when we talk about this idea of education, to your point, it is inextricably tied to morality. And there is a good. I always think of the fictional doctor, Dr. Ian Malcolm, which is from Jurassic Park, right? Where he says that famous line, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. In saying, I think when I look at education, there are many that have that pursuit of, you know, the buzzwords of STEM and science. And not that those are bad things, those are good things. But when you take those devoid of the humanities, when you take those devoid of the sense of right and wrong and morality, we get what we are seeing. And obviously that is very concerning. And as you said, you reap what you sow. When you write about this, and particularly in Boys Adrift and Girls on the Edge, you describe very different challenges facing boys and girls in today's culture. What would you say are some of the key differences parents should understand when it comes to the differences between boys and girls? So for boys, some of the big temptations are video games and pornography, and you don't want to allow that because those bad habits once formed are very hard to break. Prevention is much easier than cure. And so parents need to limit, govern, and guide what their sons are doing with their devices. For girls, the temptations are social media. Girls, if the parents are not on board and understanding what's going on, girls will spend a lot of time on TikTok and Instagram, which we know greatly increase the risk of anxiety and depression for girls. Mm-hmm. So girls, parents again need to shut down the screens and get kids out in the real world.
I was curious, Dr. Sax, I mean, it's been a pleasure to have you here today speaking to our students and to faculty. And I know you're going to be speaking with parents this evening, but what are some key things that you would say to parents related to that? It seems like with this particular generation, they seem to be having a hard time just saying no.
Parents need to be the first teachers of virtue. So my approach there is very Aristotelian, which is that you acquire virtue by practicing virtue. Mm-hmm. And parents need to insist on good behavior and to install parental monitoring apps. And we're going to talk a lot this evening about parental monitoring apps. And I will recommend Jean Twenge's new book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. Because a lot of parents will push back and they'll say, well, my kid's just going to uninstall the app and reinstall it. They'll uninstall it, do whatever they want, and reinstall it, and I'll have no way of knowing. Well, Jean Twenge will show you how to install the app so it cannot be uninstalled. She really knows every detail here. If you're not sure, read her book. She'll take you step by step. I have found that when parents push back, it's because parents are intimidated by their kids. They don't want to have the argument. They don't want their kids to not like them. I'll share a story that I will not share this evening, but I'll share a quick story with you. So for 18 years, I was an attending physician at Shady Grove Hospital in Rockville, Maryland, admitting my patients when they were sick to the hospital. One night I got a call from the hospital after midnight not to admit a patient. A 15-year-old girl, a patient of mine, was in the ER. She was a victim of sexual assault, but they were not calling me to admit the patient. A gynecologist was there, and it was a forensic exam because charges were going to be filed. But Mom was in the ER, and she was hysterical. That was the word that the ER attending used. And Mom was asking me to come in to talk with Mom, mainly. So I did. And I met with her in the consultation room next to the ER. And when I came into the consultation room, the first thing Mom said, she said, I knew I shouldn't have let her go. It was a frat party at the college. She's 15 years old. I knew I shouldn't have let her go. And so you want to grab Mom and shake her and say, well, then why'd you let her go? But I already knew the answer. She wants to be her daughter's best friend. And a friend cannot command. A friend is a peer. So I did share that story when I spoke at the Academy of the Holy Name in Tampa, Florida. And after my talk, a mom came up to share her story. And her daughter, 14 years old, had recently come up to her and said, hey, guess what? We're all going to Cancun for spring break. And Mom took out her phone and looked at it and said, well, I can't get away that week. I'm busy. And daughter said, I didn't say you're going. We're going. Me, all the girls, we're going. And Mom said, you're going to Cancun, Mexico without any grown-ups? I don't think it's safe. And her daughter said, it's totally fine. It's fine. We'll be safe. We'll stay together. We'll have our phones. We'll be fine. And Mom said, no, I don't think it's safe. You're 14, but you could easily fast for 18. I don't think some young man, this is why all the American college men go for spring break. I don't think it's safe. She said, it's totally fine. It's totally safe. It's fine. And Mom said, no, you're not going. And she told me her daughter exploded, started screaming at her, saying, I hate you. I hate you. You're going to totally ruin my whole life. And Mom said, well, to be honest, sometimes I'm not so fond of you either. But I am your mother, and that is a job. Like any job, it has a job description. And item one in my job description is I have to keep you safe. And I know more than you do about the behavior of drunk young men, and you are not going. If you're doing the right thing as a parent, there will be times that you do things that your kid doesn't approve of and might really make your kid angry. You have to have the courage to be the authoritative parent.
When we're talking about that parental authority, obviously we, as parents, we always want to strike that balance between love and care and affection, and yet that authority that's in place. And I know you write about this, and I know you talk about this, where the collapse of parenting, maybe you could speak to that in the sense of what really, in your observation, has been the collapse? Where has that fallen? Because in hearing from parents, and obviously in our culture today, we have a lot of things coming at them from our culture. We have the issues of postmodern truth, and truth is based on how you feel, and as you said, wanting to be their friend, and they think that's the most loving thing. What really is the collapse of parenting, and how can we fight against it?
Well, tonight I'm going to talk at some length about Dana Baumrind, the great pioneer of parenting research. And basically, she found that the authoritative parent is a parent who is both strict and loving. But in the years before her death in 2018, she expressed frustration that increasingly she found American parents think you have to choose between being either strict or loving, that they had lost the understanding that previous parents had that the best parents are both strict and loving.
What are the top, 3 or 4 boundaries you would say parents need to have as it relates to technology, screen, social media?
So certainly no devices in the bedroom, no phones in the bedroom. At what age should kids have a smartphone? So I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal more than 10 years ago in which I said no smartphones before 13 years of age. Jean Twenge, who is our nation's leading scholar on this topic, just recently came out with her book in which she says no smartphones before 16 years of age. And she's aware that that is a new recommendation that is older than many previous recommendations. And she's provided scripts for parents, exactly what to say to your kid when your 14-year-old says, everyone else has a phone.
Yeah.
I'm the only kid without a phone. She gives you a paragraph of exactly what to say to your kid, that you are her parent and not the other kid's parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the other kids are anxious and depressed. You don't want them to be anxious and depressed. It's a very useful book that walks you step by step all the things you need to do. No smartphone in the bedroom, no video game console in the bedroom, no smartphone certainly until 13, maybe not until 16 years of age. Get away from the screens, get out into the real world. No earbuds, no headsets in the car. When you're in the car, you should be listening to your kid, and your kid should be listening to you, not to Drake. So again, you'll find a lot more on this, especially in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, which is available as an audiobook read by me, I might add.
And Dr. Sax, can you speak a little bit to how important you think the role models are, or male and female mentors for our boys and girls, others in their community and environment?
So especially in writing my book, Boys Adrift, I consulted with comparative anthropologists, people who have spent their professional lives studying how other people have lived in different times, different places. And they'll tell you that it's not accurate to say that kids want to be adults. Girls want to be women, boys want to be men. But what does that mean? We don't teach them anymore. We used to, but we no longer do. Every enduring culture offers a community of women for girls and a community of boys for men. And in my books, I talk about the Orthodox Jewish communities and the Navajo. Those are very different cultures with radically different religious beliefs and customs. But they have strong communities of women for girls and a strong community of men for boys. Parents cannot do this alone. No enduring culture has ever done this. There's no enduring culture in which a boy learns how to be a man only from his father, or a girl learns how to be a woman only from her mother. There simply isn't. There is simply no culture in which that has been the case. The anthropologists teach us this. You need to find, or if necessary, create a community. Now, the church is the obvious place to do this, but unfortunately, many churches don't get it. And I just earlier this month, I did a full-day workshop for the Catholic Diocese of Brownsville, Texas, and we talked very frankly about how most churches are not doing a good job of this. At most churches, the youth group is a pizza party where the girls and boys are having a pizza party together and playing games together. This is not what kids need. The kids can arrange their own pizza party. They don't need the church to do this. The church needs to create a community of men for boys and a community of women for girls. And I gave an example of a church in Minnesota where they organize these summer trips where the girls go canoeing down the St. Croix River, which divides Minnesota from Wisconsin. 3 days, 2 nights. In the morning, one girl in a canoe with one woman, not her mother. And you canoe for 2 hours, and then you pull off at the designated spot where you're going to have lunch with 8 women, 8 girls for lunch. And then you get in the boat, girl gets in boat with another woman, another 2 hours down to the designated campsite where you're going to make your camp, make your campfire, sit around the campfire, tell stories, create bonds across generations. The church does very little. It doesn't expend any money. The parents spend all the money. The parents do all the heavy lifting. But the church creates the connections across generations. That's what we need. Mm-hmm. We need bonds across generations, parents and grandparents, mothers and grandmothers with girls. This is what girls need to become women of faith. This is what boys need to become men of faith. A few churches are doing this. Most are not. Most don't get it. This is not a guess. Christian Smith is the great anthropologist of American churches, and he himself has said the American church group needs to be reinvented. It's mostly pizza parties for teenagers. This is not what kids need. And in fact, I'm borrowing a lot of what I'm saying from Christian Smith, who has documented what a bad job most churches are doing. But churches can do better, and it doesn't cost anything. The fact is, unfortunately, most church leaders don't have a clue. They don't understand what kids need. Instead, they're looking at what kids want. And they think that what kids want is pizza parties and video games. And they don't understand, that may be what kids say they want, but it's not what kids need. And again, the relevant reference in my book is chapter 7 of my book, Girls on the Edge. Mm-hmm. The last 3 chapters of my book, Girls on the Edge, are mind, body, and spirit. And that last chapter of Girls on the Edge is on spiritual formation. What a girl needs to become a woman of faith is different from what a boy needs to become a man of faith. The church should understand this, but unfortunately, most churches don't.
Makes me think when it comes to parenting and education, I think one of the first primers really that we have on it is Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema, right? Where, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And really it goes on to explain, it's really the first curriculum, if you will, in the sense of, I think sometimes even as parents, we can make it harder than it needs to be. Deuteronomy 6 just says, talk about me, like the Lord saying, talk about me. Teach them these things when you sit down and when you walk by the way and when you stand and when you rise. To your point of like, even in the car, just do it in life. Like do it in everyday life. Sometimes I think we have one of two extremes. We have some parents that try to make it overly complicated, and then we have some that don't engage. And I'm curious your thoughts on when we look at that model, again, what you would say to parents, what you would say to educators when it comes to teaching these virtues, teaching these moral truths and these understandings in the everyday rhythms of life, and what that looks like and the impact that can have for them.
Well, the key word I keep coming back to is courage. And I think many parents don't have the courage to insist on giving kids what they need rather than what kids want. I can give so many examples from my own practice. 14-year-old boy, not paying attention in school, off the chart on the Connor scale, which is a measure of attention in the classroom. All the teachers have marked him at the extreme edge, not paying attention in class. Parents take him to the child psychiatrist, who says, well, certainly looks like ADHD. Let's try Vyvanse and see if it helps. And it's tremendously helpful. He's doing much better, but now he's got palpitations. He's lost his appetite. He's jittery. Parents saw an article I wrote for the New York Times about the dangers of this medication. So they bring him to me for a second opinion. And I say to Mom, is he getting plenty of sleep? And she said, oh, absolutely. We make sure he's in his bedroom at 9 o'clock every night, wake him up at 6 the next morning. That's 9 hours. That's enough, don't you think? So I say to the boy, do you have a video game console in your bedroom? He said, of course. Doesn't everybody? I said, were you playing last night? He said, of course. When did you finish? He said, 1:30, 1:45. Mom says, you were up to 1:30 playing video games? I said, is that pretty typical? He said, yeah. Sometimes 2, usually 1, 1:15, 1:30. Okay, so he needs at least 8, maybe 9 hours sleep at night. He's getting less than 5. He is sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation perfectly mimics ADHD of the inattentive variety, which was his diagnosis. Adderall, Vyvanse, going to be tremendously helpful. What's Vyvanse? What's Adderall? They're amphetamines. They compensate for the sleep deprivation. They're speed. But the appropriate remedy for sleep deprivation is sleep, not Schedule II amphetamines. So I said to Mom, all right, you got to get the video game console out of the bedroom. No more than 40 minutes a night on school nights playing video games, no more than an hour a day on weekends. And he said, that's totally unacceptable. And I was like, well, look, I can't do that. See how upset he is? This is a mom who's intimidated by her 14-year-old, who is unwilling to do what needs to be done. This boy doesn't have ADHD. He's sleep deprived. The child psychiatrist, the board-certified child psychiatrist, was mistaken. He didn't do an adequate sleep history, and I find this all the time, and I've written about this. An American kid is 14 times more likely than a kid in the United Kingdom to be diagnosed with ADHD. And even the kids in the United Kingdom are outliers compared to the European continent. I wrote a book for a French publisher titled Pourquoi les garçons perdent pied, les filles se mettent en danger. Working with colleagues in France, I learned that in all of France, there are fewer than 6,000 kids on medication for ADHD. There are more kids in San Diego County on medication for ADHD than there are in all of France, a nation of 67 million people. Why is that? Because in this country, medication is the first resort. In France, it is the last resort. ADHD is overdiagnosed. And in this country, there are boys staying up past midnight playing video games, or girls staying up past midnight on TikTok, on Instagram, and the parents don't even have a clue, which is another part of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. Parents are not doing their job.
Yeah. And sometimes, to your point, we have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at the whole context of the child, and of who they are and what they're doing. And sometimes maybe it is a simple structure change in their life, the influence change, a sleep adjustment that we're looking at, as opposed to going to what we might term as a quick fix for things. And so we need to actually be parents and actually know our child and love them in that way. As you said, like it's about loving them, but also having the courage to do what we know we need to do, and the calling to fulfill the role that God has given to us as parents, to love our children in the true essence of the world, not be their best friend, but love them and do what's necessary.
And have the stamina to stay the course in that.
Yeah.
You've dealt with a lot of teenagers, and we have that privilege, or in children, just in their journey here. But it's an up and down road, and it's often that your kids might not like you because you've said no or made a choice, and that's how it should be on some level. If a parent, say we're comparing Trinity to other educational options, what developmental and moral distinctives would you urge them to look for that could provide a worthwhile education, positively impacting them and their child for the rest of their lives? Like, what would you recommend to a parent to be looking for in their educational choices? Well,
I would remind the parent of those longitudinal cohort studies that I cite in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, showing that the child or teenager who is most honest and most self-controlled is 20 years later the adult who's most likely to be healthy, happy, and wealthy. Health, wealth, and happiness is predicted by honesty and self-control 20 years earlier. That's not true of grades or test scores. And many parents don't get that. Many parents, the first thing they want to know about a school is, where do the graduates go to college? Many parents think that I want to see a school where the graduates go to Stanford and Princeton. They think that's the most important thing. It is not. We know this. We have lots of good data on this. We actually have very good studies showing, after you control for household income, GPA, and test scores, the student who goes to Stanford or Princeton 20 years down the road is not earning any more money than the kid who goes to a local college. A local college that is not selective in admissions. This was a study, incidentally, done by Princeton University professors. Wow. And has been replicated subsequently by others. Parents are mistaken. American parents think that attending a highly selective university like Stanford or Princeton predicts good outcomes. It doesn't. Honesty and self-control predicts health, wealth, and happiness. Attending Stanford doesn't. Parents don't know this. And again, I've tried to teach this in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. Parents need to know that your first priority as parents is not to get your kid into Stanford. Your first priority as parents is to teach virtue and character. It's not a sermon. It's a robust empirical finding. So when you visit a school, your first question should not be, where do the graduates go to college? Your first question should be, how do you teach virtue and character?
Yeah, it's not what can they do, it's who are they?
Yeah.
Who are they when they're done? What type of people? Well, I think one other question that comes to mind for many Christian families, and as they're living in this world, living in this culture, they're worried about the world, or they're worried about the culture that's coming at them. Things like gender confusion, dysphoria, the moral drift, the loss of perseverance, grit, like all of those things I think are coming at our students in a variety of ways and through a variety of mediums. What practical encouragement would you have and to offer parents? And I know maybe some of this is a lot of what we've already been talking about, but particularly when we look at this idea of culture, what are some of those practical encouragements you can give to parents who want to raise children amidst these challenging cultural narratives?
To be totally honest, it's kind of a depressing talk. I do have a much more fun talk titled Why Gender Matters. It's a completely different talk. It's about hardwired differences, because you mentioned transgender. Hardwired differences between girls and boys. And we begin with smell. It turns out that for many odors, girls and women have a sense of smell that's much more sensitive than boys and men. How much more sensitive? 5 times? 10 times? No, it's 100,000 times more sensitive. So a man and a woman walk into a room and a woman says, "Oh my goodness, it stinks in here, I'm going to throw up." And the man says, "I don't smell anything." And then we looked at sex differences in brain development, sex differences in brain activity, some of which we looked at today, which are astonishing and robust, with no overlap between the sexes. The determinants of intelligence in men turn out to be completely different from the determinants of intelligence in women in terms of brain anatomy. This is a new finding from Stanford Medical School that most people are not aware of. Then we conclude with a look at transgender. So in 1994, the American Psychiatric Association asked, how common is transgender? And the answer they gave, they said it's so rare, it's hard to estimate with any accuracy, but we estimate it's 1 in 30,000 men and 1 in 100,000 women. Last year, the CDC surveyed high school students in the United States. 3.3% said that they are transgender, more than 3 in 100. So we went from 1 in 30,000 in 1994 to more than 3 in 100 last year. Why is that? The short answer is that the culture has become immensely toxic. The National Football League has decided that the halftime entertainer this February will be Bad Bunny, who performs in a dress and high heels. So the culture has become toxic, and parents need to understand this. They need to understand, how do you protect your kid, and what do you do when your son comes home and says, "Hey, Emily across the street just says that she is now Edward." How do you respond to that? So maybe you'll bring me back to do that talk for parents.
Yeah.
That talk's a lot more fun.
Yes, we need to be bringing you back.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. Well, as we close our time, I think just a final question. Obviously, we've talked about a lot of different things today and looked at a lot of different things. And I know you have a lot of books and other things where parents can find more information and dig a little deeper into all of this. But if you could leave every parent and every person listening with one highlight that really, when it comes down to it, you really don't want them to forget about successfully raising children in today's world, what would that be?
Prioritize the family. And that starts with supper at home. So in Carline, talking with parents, I find that this parent's going to drive her daughter to computer coding class and then travel team soccer, and they're going to eat a sandwich on the way from computer coding class to travel team soccer. We have good studies. Frank Algar and his colleagues interviewed more than 10,000 adolescents coast to coast and asked them, in the last 7 days, how many evening meals have you had at home with at least one parent, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and found a huge benefit. Not just going from 0 to 7, but at almost every step along the way, family meals in terms of decreasing anxiety and depression and improving outlook. The benefits of a family meal at home are tremendous. Prioritize the family. If computer coding class is interfering with a family meal at home, cancel computer coding class. The unintended message that parent is allowing that daughter to get is that being amazing and having all these activities on your college application is more important than time at home with family. Don't send that message. Cancel the activities. Prioritize the family. And that starts with supper at home.
Wow.
Very good.
Dr. Sax, thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for sharing. And for those listening, I hope this was helpful. And obviously, again, you can look up Dr. Leonard Sax and all of his books and research for some more information. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sax.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Different by Design. To learn more about Trinity Classical Academy, visit us at trinityclassicalacademy.com. And for more information about our approach to classical Christian education, be sure to check out the conversations over at the Classical Academy podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and share. Until next time.